Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere warm, dry, and a little too sandy for comfort. You're standing at the edge of an ancient desert, the stars burning cold above your head. The wind moves slow, brushing through your hair with a whisper that sounds like someone breathing secrets from thousands of years ago. Welcome to Egypt, the old one, the real one, the one that smells faintly of dust, oil, and something you can't quite name. You probably won't survive this, but that's okay. You're not really here to live through it. You're here to drift, to float just above it all while the past hums below your feet. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I always like knowing where my fellow night wanderers are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sand under your feet feels cooler than it looks. It's midnight along the Nile, and everything is still except for the insects chirping somewhere out of sight. You can almost see the outline of the pyramids in the distance, those impossible triangles rising like old thoughts against the sky. The air tastes of river clay and fire smoke. The scent of the night tells you someone's still working. Not the nobles, of course. They're asleep behind limestone walls, guarded by painted gods and well-fed cats. No, the ones awake are the workers, the ones whose names don't get written on papyrus scrolls. Their sweat stains the stories of others. You start walking toward a faint orange glow. A small fire flickers beside a row of mud brick huts. There's laughter, the dull sound of a hammer, maybe a song carried on the wind. The sound pulls you in like gravity. These people have the night shift of history, and you're about to meet them. A man looks up as you pass. His face is carved deep with exhaustion, but his smile is soft. He's stirring something in a clay pot that smells faintly of boiled leather and reed reeds. You realize it's glue. He's a tanner, or maybe just someone helping one. His hands look permanently stained, darkened by years of dipping hides in whatever foul brew makes them strong enough to last. The firelight gleams off his arms, wet and slick as if he's been working with melted wax. You don't know it yet, but this is your first glimpse into the weird jobs of ancient Egypt, the ones nobody wrote songs about. Everyone remembers the pharaohs and priests, but someone had to clean the temple floors, skin the cattle, prepare the ink, light the torches, and scrub the toilets of eternity. Scholars still argue whether ordinary life even existed here. Was Egypt just pyramids and gods, or did it also have bad smells, gossip, and aching backs? You already know the answer, standing here, the smoke drifting into your eyes. The tanner looks up and gestures for you to sit. You crouch beside him, watching him dip a hide into the boiling mixture. The stench makes your eyes water instantly. He chuckles, a tired, raspy laugh, and says something in a dialect you don't understand. But you can tell what he means. You'll get used to it. You won't, though. Nobody ever really gets used to this kind of work. The smell seeps into the skin, the nails, the hair. It follows you home. It marks you in ways that no perfume can mask. But that's the thing about ancient Egypt. It wasn't all gold and glory. It was blood and sweat and the stubborn will to keep going even when the gods looked away. You look up from the fire and the stars have shifted. Maybe an hour has passed, maybe more. Somewhere out on the horizon, you hear the distant clatter of a chisel. Even now, someone is carving stone by torchlight, etching lines that might outlast empires. You imagine a pyramid being built, one block at a time, with voices echoing against the rock like trapped spirits. You start walking again, following the faint hum of the Nile. It's wider than you expected, black, smooth, almost motionless. The water smells faintly metallic, like it's remembering the blood of sacrifices. On the far bank, you see lanterns bobbing like fireflies. Those are the boatmen, haulers, ferrymen, traders. You imagine them moving goods that range from wheat and beer to the jars of honey offered to gods. Some boats even carry mummies. You think about that for a second. The living rowing the dead through moonlight. Your feet crunch under the sand. You pass fields that shimmer faintly under starlight, rows of barley and flax, silent except for croaks at the edges. A few huts stand nearby, their walls painted with crude symbols. Chickens sleep inside baskets. A dog lifts its head, stares at you, then goes back to dreaming. You find yourself at the edge of a work site, a small group of men pulling on ropes. Something massive looms half buried in the dark. Not a pyramid this time, but maybe a temple wall or a statue's torso. The men grunt softly, moving in rhythm. You can hear their sandals scuffing the dust. The smell of sweat mixes with incense drifting from somewhere unseen. You think about how every single block here has fingerprints pressed into it, how every carving was once a fresh wound in the stone. Scholars still argue whether the builders were slaves, conscripts, or paid laborers. But looking at their faces now, hard, determined, half asleep, you realize it doesn't matter. They're all bound to the idea of building something bigger than themselves, even if it breaks them. You walk past, slow and silent, careful not to disturb their rhythm. You feel like a ghost among ghosts, floating between centuries. Somewhere in the darkness, a woman hums a lullaby to her baby. The sound carries over the river, soft and cracked, as if time itself is singing. The moon slips behind a thin cloud, and for a moment the world feels suspended, just breath and shadow and quiet persistence. This is Egypt before the tourists, before textbooks, before the myths hardened into marble. It's alive. It's ordinary. It's exhausting. And as you move deeper into the night, following that faint smell of glue and sweat and oil, you start to realize history isn't written by kings. It's soaked into the hands of people like this, the nameless, sleepless ones who kept the world running while everyone else dreamed of eternity. The fire crackles behind you, and you know it's time to step further in, to see what other strange, forgotten labors this civilization built itself on. You take one last breath of the desert air. It smells of burnt cedar and salt. Somewhere ahead, another light flickers. You start walking toward it. You follow the faint glow through a narrow alley of mud brick houses. The night is quiet, but every so often a dog barks or a distant horn echoes across the river. You notice the smell first, rich, pungent, almost unbearable if you weren't already acclimated to the desert. It's the tanners again, but this time you're closer. You see vats bubbling with what looks like sludge, men dipping animal hides over and over, hands dark with years of work, fingernails caked with grime. Every motion is deliberate, trained, precise, but also clearly exhausting. You realize these workers must have arms like iron to survive this daily grind. One of them looks up and nods, smiling faintly despite the stench.
His voice is a low rumble as he mutters something to his companion. You can't understand the words, but the tone carries an odd warmth, a shared camaraderie born from suffering together. It makes you think the weirdest jobs in history weren't just about endurance. They were about the quiet pride of surviving in a world that most people will never see. The hides hang to dry nearby, flapping softly in the night breeze. Scholars still argue whether tanning in Egypt was done primarily for trade, ritual, or local use, but you don't need a debate to know it smelled awful. And yet, someone had to do it, day in and day out, without applause, without recognition. You step closer and almost gag at the rich, earthy odor. It's so thick it clings to your clothes and hair, and you can almost taste it on the air. You move past the tanners and find yourself at the edge of a temple courtyard. The ground is swept clean, unnaturally so, and the flicker of torchlight reveals a group of scribes hunched over papyrus scrolls. Their bodies are hunched, eyes red-shot, fingers stained with ink. They look up briefly as you pass. There's no smile here, just concentration and fatigue. The temple scribe's life is a strange mix of prestige and pain. Endless hours of copying hieroglyphs, preparing records, keeping accounts. You watch as one scribe dips his reed pen into black ink. The ink pools like a small lake, thick and sticky. He pauses, then continues, painstakingly replicating symbols. Scholars still argue whether these scribes were considered elite or merely overworked functionaries, but seeing it up close, you sense their work is both revered and silently cursed. Their bodies bear the weight of their craft, their minds trapped in symbols that, while beautiful, demand perfection. Nearby, a young apprentice fidgets nervously, trying to keep up with the senior scribes. You notice small smudges on his robes, evidence of mistakes. One of the older scribes sighs, pointing out the error with a delicate finger. There's no shouting, just quiet correction. A subtle terror that can ruin your day or even your career. It's a high-stakes, low-recognition position, a combination that seems almost designed to test the patience of anyone foolish enough to dream of it. You wander further into the courtyard and spot another strange task, something that sounds mundane but is, in fact, far from it. There's a servant kneeling near a stone basin, scrubbing away remnants of old offerings. Bits of mold and sticky residue cling stubbornly to the stone. You realize that part of the scribe's work, and many other temple workers' jobs, includes cleaning. Not just floors, but sacred objects, ceremonial tools, even the robes of priests. The tiniest mistake here could be interpreted as a sign of disrespect. It's a subtle, invisible form of labor, one that almost nobody appreciates. And yet, it is essential. Without these invisible hands, the temple would crumble, not physically, perhaps, but socially and spiritually. The sacred order depended on them, just as it depended on the tanners, the builders, and the river laborers. As you move past the temple, the night air grows cooler, carrying the scent of the river and distant cooking fires. You glimpse a figure hunched over a small table, testing clay tablets with ink. Another apprentice, another set of eyes red with concentration. The repetition seems endless, a rhythm without variation. And yet there is art here, a kind of beauty in the monotonous dedication. You can almost feel the energy of centuries of labor concentrated in these small, repetitive motions. Then you hear a low, guttural noise, farther down the street, closer to the river. It's a sound that makes you stop, curious and uneasy. You follow it and see a man kneeling beside a small mud basin, carefully handling something that looks both delicate and repulsive. He's preparing the raw materials for embalming. Scholars still argue whether these processes were primarily ritualistic or practical, but witnessing them in the moonlight, you understand that it's both. There is reverence here, but also a level of physical discomfort that seems almost cruel. You inch closer, careful not to disturb him. The smell of herbs, oils, and something far more unpleasant reaches you. His hands move with confidence, and you watch as he works to preserve what will eventually become a mummy. The precision is hypnotic. Every motion counts. Every mistake could spoil months of work, or worse, anger a god in ways you're not ready to imagine. And as you step back, breathing the sharp night air, you begin to sense a pattern. Every job you've glimpsed so far, tanning, scribeship, cleaning, embalming, shares the same secret. The labor is unseen, the effort immense, and the recognition almost non-existent. Yet without these people, the grand image of ancient Egypt would collapse. The pharaohs might rise in monumental tombs, the temples might stand in awe-inspiring geometry, but the world between the bricks, the sweat, the blood, the quiet nights of work, would vanish entirely. You continue walking along the riverbank, the reflection of torchlight dancing on the water's surface, and somewhere far off, the sound of oars dipping into the Nile rises and falls in a rhythm you almost recognize as music. The music of survival, of the night shift of history, of the people who made it all possible.
You leave the riverbank and wander into a narrow lane between mud brick houses. The moonlight flickers across the walls, casting long, restless shadows. Somewhere nearby, a faint scratching sound rises from the ground. It's the scribes, again, copying records onto papyrus. But this time you're closer. You notice their hands, calloused, stained with ink, trembling slightly from fatigue. You wonder how they managed to write precise hieroglyphs with such care after hours of repetition. One small mistake could mean hours of scraping the ink off and starting over. Scholars still argue whether scribes had higher social status than craftsmen, but here, in the dim torchlight, all you see is relentless work. A young apprentice fidgets as he tries to match the senior scribe's speed. His fingers smear ink across the scroll, leaving tiny black smudges like the footprints of some mischievous bird. The older scribe sighs, a slow, tired sound, and gestures sharply with a reed pen, correcting the mistake without raising his voice. You sense the quiet terror of their profession. Every stroke of the pen is a delicate negotiation with eternity. Nearby, a small group of scribes dips their pens into bowls of ink, each a different shade of black or brown. You watch as the ink pools like liquid night before being pressed onto the papyrus. There is beauty in their precision, an almost meditative rhythm, and yet the work is grueling. The low light, the stiff posture, the constant repetition. It would crush anyone not trained for it from childhood. You glance at a small shelf holding stacks of papyrus. Some are neatly rolled, others fraying at the edges. You realize that every scroll here represents not just knowledge, but labor. Years of study, hours of painstaking transcription, and a deep sense of responsibility. Without these scribes, history itself might have slipped into oblivion. The grand temples, the elaborate tombs, the pyramids, they all exist today because someone carefully recorded what mattered. Then you hear a low murmur from behind a doorway. Curious, you peek inside and see a servant kneeling over a stone basin, scrubbing the residue of offerings from the previous day. Bits of mold and sticky remnants cling stubbornly to the stone. This is the mundane but critical labor no one celebrates. Every clean surface, every polished tool
ensures the rituals run smoothly. You watch him work, hands moving mechanically, and realize how essential invisible labor was to maintaining the sacred order. The night air carries the faint aroma of herbs and oil from a nearby workshop. You follow it and arrive at a small courtyard where a man is preparing materials for embalming. The smell is pungent, a mixture of natron, spices, and something faintly metallic. He moves with remarkable precision, measuring powders and oils, carefully applying each to the body before wrapping it. Scholars still argue whether embalming practices were primarily religious or practical, but watching him work, you can see that it's both, a ritual steeped in reverence and a craft that demands skill and patience. You step back slightly, breathing in the night air, letting the scents of the river, the tanner's vats, and the embalmer's scent mingle. The contrast is dizzying, the sweetness of herbs, the earthy stink of hides, the metallic tang of preparation. Each element tells a story, not of kings or gods, but of the nameless people whose labor made life and death possible. As you move deeper into the temple complex, the torchlight flickers across massive stone walls. You notice tiny carvings, perhaps left by apprentices or workers during rare moments of leisure. Little doodles, perhaps even secret messages. Scholars still argue whether these marks were intentional art or casual scratches. But to you, they feel like whispers from history, quiet reminders that someone was always watching, recording, surviving. Nearby, a group of young scribes laugh softly, exchanging minor jokes while keeping their hands steady. It's a fleeting glimpse of humanity amid the monotony. You realize that even in the strangest, most grueling jobs, small moments of connection existed, tiny sparks of life that kept them going through nights like this. You continue wandering, passing courtyards and small workshops. You see a reed pen maker carefully slicing the reeds, soaking them, and shaping them into tools for writing. The repetitive motion of his hands mirrors the scribe's own labor, a cycle of preparation and execution. Every pen, every scroll, every recorded word depends on countless unseen hands, each contributing to the complex machinery of civilization. Somewhere ahead, a faint melody drifts across the stone floors. A temple singer, perhaps, practicing for a ritual later in the day. Her voice is soft but precise, weaving through the night air, blending with the distant river sounds and the faint clatter of tools. You pause, letting the melody settle in your mind. The night seems fuller now, more alive, a tapestry of effort, sound, and scent. And as you step back into the narrow lane, leaving the temple behind, you reflect on the strange reality of ancient Egypt. Its grandeur, its gods, and its pyramids all relied on the silent, often grueling work of people who were rarely remembered. Without tanners, scribes, cleaners, and embalmers, the image of Egypt that survives today would crumble. Their labor, unseen and unsung, underpins every monument, every ritual, every scroll. The night air is cool now, carrying faint hints of river mist and distant smoke. Somewhere far off, the tanner's vats bubble softly, the scribe's pens scratch relentlessly, and the embalmer's hands move with measured devotion. You realize that history is alive in these quiet, unseen labors, and you are walking through it, one careful step at a time. You leave the temple courtyard behind, the torchlight shrinking in your wake. The sand under your feet shifts softly as you move toward the outskirts of the village, where the night air grows heavier with strange, pungent smells. Somewhere ahead, you hear a faint gurgling and splashing, followed by the low, muffled sounds of someone muttering under their breath. Curiosity pulls you forward,
and you round a corner to find a group of servants performing a job so bizarre it almost makes you stop in your tracks. Toilet duty. Yes, in ancient Egypt, someone had to clean the latrines of royalty. The smell hits you immediately, sharp and acrid, curling up your nostrils. The servants wear long aprons, crude gloves, and faces that have grown immune to the stench. They move methodically, scooping waste from stone basins and canals, scrubbing surfaces until even the faintest trace of filth is gone. Scholars still argue whether this work was considered dishonorable or merely necessary. But standing here, you understand the physical and mental toll it took. Every day someone faced this task without applause, without acknowledgement. The servants exchange quiet murmurs, some joking to pass the time, others simply humming to themselves to block out the smell. You notice a small child observing from a safe distance, eyes wide, perhaps learning the trade for a future necessity. It strikes you that survival often required doing what no one else wanted, and that the unseen labor of these people kept even the highest palaces functional. As you continue past this grisly scene, the scent of the Nile River returns, mingling with herbs, spices, and the faint smoke of nighttime fires. You approach a dimly lit workshop where embalming is underway, a continuation of the strange, macabre work you glimpsed earlier. The embalmers move with precision, wrapping bodies carefully in linens, applying oils and resins to preserve them for eternity. You notice the intricate rituals involved, chants, careful measurements, and a reverent hand on each body. It's both practical and spiritual, a laborious balancing act between life and death. The night grows colder as you follow the river's edge, and the moon hangs low, casting long silver reflections across the water. Somewhere ahead, the smell of herbs and spices mingles with something far darker, something that makes your stomach tighten. You creep closer and see a small flickering fire beside a narrow pathway. Around it, several embalmers are at work, preparing bodies for the journey to the afterlife. Their movements are precise, almost ritualistic, and the air is thick with the scent of natron, oils, and resin. You realize that embalming wasn't just a craft. It was a dark, exhausting art, a strange marriage of science, superstition, and devotion. Scholars still argue whether embalmers were viewed as sacred specialists or mere laborers with a grim task, but seeing it firsthand, you understand it was both. The embalmers work in silence, save for the occasional muttered chant. They handle each body with a careful respect, cleaning, drying, and wrapping in linen with methodical care. You notice that even minor mistakes are unacceptable. One slip could ruin a burial or offend a god. And yet, this work is repetitive, relentless, and often carried out under conditions that would make most people gag or faint. Somehow, these individuals endure it night after night, year after year, driven by faith, obligation, or the simple necessity of survival. Nearby, a young apprentice is nervously assisting an older embalmer. His hands tremble as he measures powders, dips linen into resin, and applies oils with exacting precision. One small mistake earns a quiet sigh or a pointed glance, a silent reminder of the stakes. You imagine the pressure he must feel, knowing that a mistake could have consequences that extend beyond the mortal world. The weight of responsibility seems almost unbearable, but he persists. As you move along the edge of the pathway, the faint gurgle of the Nile provides a haunting background score. Somewhere, the river's current carries the night's quiet energy, echoing the toil of countless hands. The embalmer's work is only a fraction of the hidden labor that sustains life, culture, and ritual in ancient Egypt. There are men sharpening knives in distant workshops for the butchers, and women preparing herbs for ceremonial incense. Rat hunters patrol the granaries, keeping vermin from devouring food stores. Each task is essential, yet invisible, a thread in the tapestry of survival. You notice a man sharpening a long, curved blade near a small fire. Sparks fly as metal meets stone, and the rhythmic sound resonates in the night. He is a butcher, preparing tools to process animals for both sustenance and ritual. The work is repetitive, physically taxing, and often gruesome, yet necessary. Scholars still argue whether butchers were socially respected or quietly scorned, but their labor underpins every meal, every feast, and every temple offering. Without them, both the living and the dead would suffer. The night air grows thick with the scent of water and decay as you continue. You reach a granary where rat hunters silently stalk vermin across the floor. The traps snap with quiet precision, and their eyes dart constantly, tracking tiny shadows. This work may seem minor, even trivial, but it prevents famine, protects stored grain, and ensures survival for the village. You marvel at the skill and patience required, realizing that even the smallest, most overlooked jobs carried immense responsibility. Further along the riverbank, fishermen of the marshes are hauling in their nightly catch. Nets glisten in the moonlight as fish thrash and splash. Some of the catch is destined for the pharaoh's table, some for local families. The fishermen move quickly, wet hands gripping slimy fish, mud squelching underfoot, eyes fixed on the shimmering movement in the nets. Scholars still argue whether certain fishing practices were ceremonial or purely practical. But you can see the reverence these workers hold for the creatures and the river that sustains them. Not far from the fishermen, crocodile keepers perform a dangerous and ritualistic task. Large reptiles shift and snap in the water, and the keepers feed them carefully, chanting softly. One wrong move could be fatal. Their courage and focus are extraordinary, and you realize that these sacred creatures, so feared and revered, are maintained by individuals whose labor is both dangerous and largely invisible to outsiders. You pause for a moment, taking a deep breath. The night is alive with sound, scent, and movement. Tanners stir their vats, scribes scratch their pens across papyrus, embalmers wrap bodies with care, and rat hunters stalk shadows. Even in the silence of the moonlit Nile, you sense a rhythm, a quiet pulse of labor that sustains an entire civilization. Without these individuals, the monuments, rituals, and daily life of ancient Egypt would crumble. And as you move onward, leaving the embalmers behind, you realize that every job you've glimpsed so far, no matter how strange, unpleasant, or dangerous, carries its own story. These are the hands that held Egypt together, the nameless figures who labored in darkness so that history could shine in light. You step carefully, following the hum of the Nile, knowing there are more weird, overlooked jobs waiting to reveal themselves as the night continues.
The faint aroma of smoke and spices fades as you leave the embalmer's courtyard behind. You follow the winding path toward the village outskirts, where the sounds of night labor change. Here, the butchers ply their grisly trade. You see them kneeling over stone tables, knives glinting in torchlight, moving with a precision born of practice. Blood seeps into grooves carved over years, pooling briefly before being swept into channels. The scent is sharp, metallic, undeniable, and your stomach twists involuntarily. Scholars still argue whether butchers held a respected role or were quietly scorned, but it's clear that their skill sustains every household, temple, and feast. Without them, life itself could falter. You watch a young apprentice carefully handle a cleaver, guided by a stern mentor whose hands are scarred and steady. Each slice is measured, deliberate, almost meditative. The butcher hums quietly, a rhythm echoing through the night, guiding the apprentice through the motions. You realize that this is more than work. It is endurance, patience, and mastery of the gruesome. Even in the night, the air vibrates with their quiet dedication, a strange beauty beneath the gore. Nearby, the smell of fermenting barley drifts from a small brewery. Beer, a staple in ancient Egypt, is brewed nightly in vats the size of small rooms. Men and women stir the thick mash, testing its consistency, scraping froth from the surface and filling jars for daily consumption. The work is hot, sticky, and monotonous. Scholars still argue whether brewing beer was primarily a domestic task or an industrial one, but the sheer volume suggests a system almost impossible to sustain without countless laborers. The yeast and grain smell sweet, cloying even, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of the butcher's work. You pass the brewery and hear soft rustling from the granaries. Rat hunters stalk silently among the stored grain, tools in hand, eyes darting in the torchlight. Every trap set is a battle against destruction, every captured vermin a small victory for survival. Their work is silent, often invisible, yet crucial. Without these rat hunters, months of carefully harvested crops could vanish, and famine would creep quietly across the land. You step closer to watch one set a trap, fingers nimble and precise. Scholars still debate the effectiveness of ancient rodent control, but the hunters' focused energy leaves no doubt. Their skill was real and necessary. The night shifts again, and the river hums in the distance. You hear oars dipping into water and see the fishermen hauling their nets, the glint of moonlight catching silver scales. Some catch is destined for local meals, some for temple offerings. Their hands are wet, cold, and slippery as they lift wriggling fish, careful not to drop them back into the Nile. Scholars still argue about the sacred versus practical aspects of fishing. But watching these men work, you sense a reverence for both the river and the life it sustains. Along the marshy edges, crocodile keepers perform one of the strangest jobs you've encountered. The reptiles shift and snap, eyes glowing faintly in torchlight, while the keepers offer food with careful rhythmic chants. Every movement carries weight. Every error could be fatal. It is dangerous work, and yet, like the embalmers and butchers, it is crucial to the functioning of temple rituals and societal order. You feel a thrill mixed with dread watching them manage these ancient predators with calm, deliberate precision. And then you notice the reed pen makers, working under dim torchlight in a small workshop. Their hands are wet from soaking reeds, slicing and shaping them into pens that will be used by the scribes in the temples. Each pen is a tiny instrument of civilization itself, connecting the labor of one group to the work of another. Scholars still debate the significance of these tools, but you can see how critical they were to keeping records, rituals, and bureaucracy moving smoothly. Every smooth line of ink depends on the unseen labor of these artisans. You pause for a moment, listening to the night alive with subtle, persistent sounds, the scraping of knives, the soft plop of grain, the gurgle of water, and distant humming of embalmers at work. Every task, no matter how obscure or unpleasant, contributes to a vast machine of life, religion, and history. Without these odd, often despised jobs, the monuments, rituals, and societal systems of Egypt would falter. You take a slow breath, letting the night wrap around you, carrying with it the echoes of the countless nameless hands that made it all possible. And as you step further along the riverbank, following the mingling scents of herbs, blood, and smoke, you realize this journey has only begun. The weird, exhausting jobs of ancient Egypt stretch far beyond what you can see, each more bizarre, vital, and unsung than the last. The night thickens as you move deeper into the village outskirts, the river now a constant silver thread beside you. The air carries faint hints of smoke, herbs, and something sharper, an unmistakable metallic tang that makes your stomach churn. Up ahead,
A small group of workers is clustered around a low fire, each performing tasks that make your skin crawl and your curiosity spike. The plague wardens. These men and women handle the sick and dying, tasked with controlling outbreaks before they consume entire neighborhoods. Thick cloth wraps around their faces, their hands coated in protective oils and powders, though you know these measures offer only minimal protection. One man dips a bundle into the fire, sending sparks spiraling skyward while muttering prayers to unseen gods. Scholars still argue whether these wardens were formally trained or simply thrown into the job out of desperation, but you can see clearly that their work is both necessary and terrifying. You notice a faint tremor in one of the warden's hands. He adjusts a bundle, eyes darting to the dark alleyways around him, scanning for signs of infection or chaos. Another warden whispers instructions, their words muffled by cloth. The task is grim, dangerous, and exhausting, yet crucial to the survival of the community. Their vigilance keeps sickness from spreading to nobles, scribes, and even the pharaoh. Without them, entire settlements could be wiped out overnight. A few steps further, the village granaries are alive with motion. Rat hunters creep silently along the dusty floor, eyes sharp, hands ready to snap traps on intruding vermin. They move like shadows, almost invisible in the torchlight. You realize this work requires not only patience, but nerves of steel. One wrong move could ruin weeks of stored grain, risking famine for dozens of families. Scholars still debate the methods of pest control used, but you understand that without these tireless efforts, survival itself would hang by a thread. The scent of the tanner's hides drifts faintly on the night breeze, reminding you of earlier scenes, the vats of boiling liquids, the stained hands, the relentless toil. Somewhere in the distance, scribes continue their work by dim candlelight, reeds scratching papyrus in endless repetition. The layers of labor, from the stinking to the sacred, blend into a single living organism of human effort. Every person performing an unpleasant or odd job contributes to the structure and survival of Egyptian society. Following the sound of water, you approach the Nile once more, where fishermen haul in their nightly catch. Their movements are rhythmic and precise, nets full of fish thrashing, water splashing, mud squelching underfoot. Some fish will feed temples, others will fill local kitchens. Their work is physically taxing and repetitive, yet there is a strange satisfaction in their precision. Scholars still argue whether fishing was primarily practical or ritualistic, but you can see both elements in their movements. Survival and devotion intertwined. Nearby, crocodile keepers handle the massive reptiles with caution and respect. The creatures shift and snap, eyes glinting in torchlight, while the keepers offer food and chants to maintain order. One misstep could be fatal, yet these men perform this work night after night, maintaining sacred rituals and protecting the villages from these dangerous predators. There's an odd bravery here, a combination of devotion and courage that humbles you. As you continue, a subtle aroma of herbs leads you to the perfume maker's workshop. Men and women crush flowers and mix oils in clay bowls, creating scents that will eventually grace temple rituals or noble households. The work is meticulous, demanding patience, and sometimes hazardous. Some oils are toxic if inhaled too long, and handling certain flowers can cause rashes or allergic reactions. Scholars still debate whether perfumery was considered art or simple labor, but witnessing the effort, you realize it's a little of both: craft, beauty, and endurance combined. Finally, you glimpse the cat mummifiers, hunched over tiny wrappings and linen strips. Thousands of small corpses are prepared with the utmost care, each fold precise, each body treated with ritual respect. The repetitive labor is exhausting, yet it is essential to the religious beliefs of the time. Scholars still argue about the social value of this work, but watching the careful hands at night, you recognize its sacredness, its oddity, and the quiet dedication of those who perform it. Everywhere you look, the night is alive with unseen labor. From the plague wardens to the cat mummifiers, every role is a strange, essential thread in the vast tapestry of Egyptian civilization. You pause, breathing in the mix of river air, herbs, and faint smoke, feeling the pulse of a society held together by the weird, difficult jobs that nobody wrote songs about. You leave the scent of embalming oils and cat linen behind and continue along the riverbank. The night is quieter here, but the faint rustling of reeds and soft slap of water against boats keeps your senses alert. Ahead, a dim glow reveals the next strange, almost unbelievable job: the sand counters. These men spend their days, and sometimes nights, measuring and counting sand used in construction, record-keeping, and ceremonial projects. It's a repetitive, painstaking task. Each grain seems to matter, each measure is sacred to the pharaoh's architects, and mistakes are frowned upon. Scholars still argue whether sand counting was a purely practical task or part of a larger symbolic ritual, but watching the meticulous motions of these men, you sense both significance and drudgery. Their eyes are strained from constant focus, and their hands move almost mechanically, sifting grains into precise piles. Nearby, rat hunters patrol the edges of grain stores and storage silos. You notice the contrast. The sand counter's work is quiet, almost hypnotic, while the rat hunter's labor is urgent and reactive. Every scurrying shadow, every trap snapped into place, is a small but crucial victory against the relentless pests that threaten Egypt's carefully stored food. Without these individuals, famine could easily strike unnoticed. You see the tension in their posture, the tiny flinches as they respond to the tiniest movement. The night carries a mixture of scents: the dry earth of the desert, the sweet smell of distant brewing, and the faint metallic tang of sharpened tools. Somewhere further along, fishermen pull nets from the river. Their work is rhythmic and coordinated, hands wet and cold, muscles straining under the weight of wriggling fish. Some catch will serve daily meals, some will end up in temple offerings. Scholars still debate the sacredness of fishing methods, but the careful, deliberate way the nets are handled shows a quiet reverence for both survival and ritual. Off to the side, the crocodile keepers perform their nightly rounds. The massive reptiles glide silently through the water, snapping occasionally as keepers feed them with practiced precision. Each movement carries risk, yet the work is vital for both ritual and protection. It's strange to see devotion and danger intertwined so closely, and you realize how many odd jobs in Egypt combine these elements. Without this attention, both human and animal lives could be imperiled. The soft glow of torchlight illuminates a small workshop ahead, the reed pen makers. Their hands, soaked and slippery, carefully slice and shape reeds into writing instruments. The rhythm of their labor echoes the scribe's work. Every pen crafted is a tool of civilization, connecting unseen hands to the monumental efforts recorded in temples and tombs. Scholars still argue whether these artisans were considered highly skilled or merely necessary, but you can see the precision and patience required. A faint smell of crushed flowers and oils draws your attention to a nearby perfume workshop. The makers crush, mix, and distill fragrant ingredients, creating scents for temple rituals, nobility, or trade. The labor is meticulous and sometimes hazardous. Some oils irritate the skin or eyes, but the work is crucial to the sensory life of Egyptian society. Scholars debate whether perfumery was considered a sacred art, but the dedication of these workers speaks for itself.
Finally, you approach the cat mummifiers, hunched over their tiny wrappings. Rows of small linen-wrapped bodies lie ready for ritual placement. The mummifiers work quietly, carefully folding and shaping each bundle with reverent precision. The labor is repetitive, time-consuming, and often tedious, yet deeply tied to religious beliefs and societal expectations. Scholars still argue about the social status of these workers, but you can't help but admire their patience and dedication. Everywhere you look, the night hums with the hidden pulse of civilization. From sand counters to cat mummifiers, every worker, no matter how strange or unpleasant their role, contributes to the immense, intricate machine that is ancient Egypt. You inhale the night air, thick with the scents and sounds of unseen labor, feeling the quiet rhythm of a society sustained by its overlooked essential workers. You leave the cat mummifier's quiet courtyard behind and walk toward the center of the village, where the faint sounds of human activity mix with the distant flow of the Nile. Ahead, a small group of workers is clustered around a low fire, engaged in a task so strange it almost makes you hesitate: the papyrus harvesters. These men and women wade into shallow marshes, cutting the thick stalks of papyrus with sharp blades. The reeds are heavy and wet, and the mud grips at their feet. Every stalk they cut will be boiled, pressed, and dried into the thin sheets of papyrus that scribes will later use to record history, contracts, and religious texts. Scholars still argue whether papyrus harvesters were compensated well or viewed as expendable labor, but standing here, watching the water drip from their robes, you understand how grueling the work truly is. The reeds make a rhythmic slap as they fall into the shallow water. Each worker moves in practiced coordination, avoiding snags and maintaining balance in the slippery mud. You notice one young apprentice lose his footing, the older harvester reaching out to steady him without breaking the flow. There's a silent mentorship here, a passing down of skill that ensures the vital supply of papyrus continues uninterrupted. Nearby, the river hums quietly. Fishermen pull in their nets with wet, calloused hands, the silver glint of fish flashing in the moonlight. Some of the catch will feed local families, some will be delivered as tribute to the temples or the pharaoh himself. Scholars still debate the ritual versus practical aspects of fishing, but watching the precise coordination, you sense both devotion and survival intertwined. Off to the side, the crocodile keepers are visible once more. The massive reptiles shift silently in the dark water, eyes glinting. Keepers feed and manage the creatures with calm, deliberate precision, chanting softly as they work. One wrong move could be fatal, yet these workers carry out their labor night after night, protecting the village and maintaining sacred rituals. The combination of danger and devotion is mesmerizing, a recurring theme in the odd jobs of Egypt. In a nearby workshop, reed pen makers work with soaked reeds, slicing, shaping, and trimming them for scribes. Their labor is painstaking and repetitive, yet it links directly to the scribe's monumental task of recording history, contracts, and religious texts. Scholars still argue whether reed pen makers were considered craftsmen or merely support labor, but the precision and patience you see is undeniable. The faint scent of crushed flowers leads you to another small, dimly lit building, the perfume maker's workshop. Men and women grind and mix aromatic oils and resins, creating scents for temple rituals, the pharaoh's household, and trade. Some oils are irritants, some fragrances are delicate and fleeting. Every movement requires focus and care. Scholars still debate whether perfumery was seen as sacred or merely commercial, but the dedication of the workers speaks volumes. Finally, you glimpse the cat mummifiers in their corner, hunched over tiny wrappings.
Each small body is folded carefully, wrapped in linen, and prepared for ritual placement. Their work is repetitive, delicate, and deeply tied to religious beliefs. Scholars still debate the social status of these workers, but it's impossible not to feel admiration for the care they take with these tiny lives. The night hums with hidden activity. Papyrus harvesters, fishermen, crocodile keepers, reed pen makers, perfume artisans, and mummifiers, all performing labor that is essential, odd, and largely unseen. You breathe in the air, thick with smoke, mud, herbs, and river water, and feel the pulse of an entire civilization sustained by these strange and necessary tasks.
You leave the marshes and head toward the stone-paved streets closer to the heart of the village. The night is alive with soft murmurs, clinking tools, and the occasional splash from the Nile. Ahead, a small group of workers gathers around clay ovens, performing a job that seems mundane, but is, in fact, a grueling and essential task: the bread bakers. These bakers work tirelessly, kneading heavy dough under dim torchlight, shaping loaves with practiced precision, and tending to the hot ovens that could easily burn flesh if handled carelessly. The scent of baking bread is comforting, almost sweet, cutting through the smells of river mud, herbs, and animal hides you've encountered earlier. Scholars still debate whether bakers were considered low-status laborers or respected members of society, but seeing the sweat and concentration on their faces, you know their work sustains the population in a way nothing else could. A young apprentice struggles with a lump of sticky dough, flour dusting his robes, while an older baker guides him with quiet patience. The rhythmic slap of dough against wooden boards forms an oddly hypnotic soundtrack. Every loaf they produce feeds not only families, but also temple workers and officials. A single mistake could ruin a day's supply, yet they persist, hands coated in flour, muscles aching from repetitive motion. Nearby, tanners stir their vats again, the earthy stench a constant companion to anyone walking past. The thick hides bubble as men dip them repeatedly, scrubbing, kneading, and stretching the leather into usable material. Scholars still argue whether tanning was primarily for trade or local use, but the physicality of the work and the intensity of the odor leave no doubt about its difficulty. The contrast between the comforting scent of bread and the pungent stench of hides highlights the strange variety of labor that defines life in Egypt. Off to the side, rat hunters stalk silently in the granaries, traps snapping quietly, eyes scanning for the smallest movement. They are shadows in the night, essential for preventing famine by controlling vermin that could destroy stored grain. Scholars still debate the effectiveness of ancient rodent control, but their skill and vigilance are undeniable. You sense a tension in the air, a fragile balance maintained by unseen hands. The river hums softly in the background. Fishermen haul in their nightly catch, wet hands gripping slippery nets. Crocodile keepers manage massive reptiles nearby, careful to avoid fatal errors, chanting softly as they work. Reed pen makers slice reeds for scribes, and perfumers grind fragrant oils. The strange rhythm of Egypt's odd jobs continues, each worker contributing to the survival and functioning of a complex society. A faint glow from a small building reveals another unusual occupation: the scribe's apprentices polishing inkstones and preparing pigments. The work is repetitive, meticulous, and requires concentration. Mistakes could ruin a scroll or a record. Scholars still argue whether apprentices were valued or merely expendable, but the importance of their labor is clear. Every stroke of ink in the grand temples and official records depends on these careful preparations. You pause for a moment, letting the variety of scents, sounds, and movements sink in. Bread baking, leather tanning, pest hunting,
fishing, crocodile feeding, pen making, perfumery, and scribal preparation. All these tasks, odd, grueling, or mundane, sustain the rhythm of life in Egypt. You realize that civilization itself is held together by labor few will ever see or remember. As you continue along the riverbank, the night seems alive with silent stories. Each worker, performing a strange and essential job, contributes to the living heartbeat of ancient Egypt. You inhale the night air, thick with smoke, mud, herbs, and the faint metallic tang of tools, and feel the immense, often invisible machinery of society moving around you. You move inland now, leaving behind the steady murmur of the Nile and stepping into the narrow, torch-lit alleys of a small artisan quarter. The walls around you glow faintly orange, flickering with reflected light. Here, the air is thick with dust and soot, and the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of metal on stone echoes into the night. You've reached the home of the reed pen makers, men whose hands are calloused, fingers stained dark with soot and sap. They sit cross-legged around low workbenches, slicing reeds into fine points. Each cut must be exact. Too shallow, and the pen splinters. Too deep, and it's ruined. The repetitive scrape of blades on reeds blends with the crackle of torches. The air smells faintly of river water and burned resin. One of the older artisans dips a freshly cut reed into ink, tests it on a scrap of papyrus, and nods approvingly. You notice his expression, a mix of fatigue and quiet pride. Scholars still argue whether these pen makers were seen as respected craftsmen or invisible laborers supporting scribes. But watching them work, you sense a discipline equal to that of the scribes themselves. You wander closer and see a pile of rejected reeds, thousands of them, lying in a corner like broken promises. The artisans will start again in the morning, as they have every day for years. There's a strange comfort in their persistence, a kind of devotion to invisible perfection. Every document, every royal decree, every hymn to the gods begins here, in this cramped room filled with reeds and tired men. As you move on, the night air shifts again, carrying a heavier, sweeter scent, the unmistakable aroma of fermenting yeast and barley. You've stumbled into the brewer's district, where massive clay vats bubble under torchlight. Workers, their skin glistening with sweat, stir the thick mixture with long wooden paddles. Steam rises, and you can taste the yeast on the back of your tongue. It's warm, humid, almost suffocating. The brewers hum quietly as they work, their songs barely audible over the bubbling vats. One woman ladles a spoonful of liquid, sips, and nods approvingly. Scholars still debate whether brewing beer was a domestic task or a state-regulated industry, but the scale here suggests something far larger than household consumption. You notice several clay jars lined up for distribution, some marked with temple symbols, others with common village signs. The smell is intoxicating, but cloying, almost oppressive in its sweetness. Outside, a pair of rat hunters pass by silently, traps dangling from their belts. They pause briefly to sip from a brewer's cup before moving back towards the granaries. The faint squeak of their traps fades into the distance. Life and labor never stop here. The night is simply a quieter kind of daylight. Further along, the faint light of the moon reflects off the river where fishermen pull in their last nets. You recognize their rhythm now, the tug, the twist, the careful separation of wriggling fish from tangled rope. It's physical work, repetitive and unforgiving, yet almost meditative in its pattern. The water glows silver under the torchlight, each fish glinting briefly before disappearing into baskets. Scholars still argue whether these fishermen viewed their craft as sacred service or mere survival, but you can see the reverence in their careful handling of every catch. Back on land, the crocodile keepers are still awake. The reptiles drift lazily in their pens, eyes half submerged. Keepers feed them scraps and chant softly, their words low and rhythmic.
meant to calm both beasts and men. You think about the strange irony of feeding something that could easily feed on you. It's a job no one wants, yet someone must always do it. You notice how all these labors, pen making, brewing, rat hunting, fishing, crocodile tending, connect invisibly, forming a web of necessity that sustains an entire civilization. The pen records the taxes, the beer pays the workers, the rats threaten the grain that feeds the brewers. The fishermen and keepers honor the river that feeds them all. The pattern loops endlessly, delicate but unbroken. You take a deep breath, the smells of ink, yeast, and river water blending into something uniquely Egyptian, earthy, pungent, alive. The night feels older here, as though time itself slows to watch these people at work. The moon dips low, and somewhere a temple bell sounds faintly in the distance. The workers don't pause. Their rhythm continues, as eternal and necessary as the river itself.
The path grows quieter now, the sounds of hammering and chanting fading behind you. You follow the soft glow of torches toward a large mud brick structure near the edge of the settlement. A heavy sweetness lingers in the air, part yeast, part honey, part something faintly sour. You're back among the beer brewers, though this time the work has shifted from production to preparation for delivery. Men and women roll large clay jars to a loading area by the river. Each jar is sealed with reed stoppers and stamped with a mark of ownership, a temple symbol, a noble's crest, or a worker's ration sign. You can tell by their tired faces that this process never truly ends. Beer is the lifeblood of Egypt, part payment, part offering, part nourishment. Scholars still argue whether beer was viewed as sacred sustenance or everyday necessity, but here, under the flickering torchlight, it's clearly both. You pause near a young woman scraping residue from the rim of a vat. Her hands are red and raw, and her robe damp with sweat and barley pulp. Yet she hums softly, her rhythm steady, her expression calm. There's something hypnotic in the repetition, the same motion, hour after hour, shaping the invisible foundation of society. You realize that behind the grand monuments and hieroglyphs, this is what held Egypt together: endless, unseen labor. The air shifts again as you walk toward another workshop, smaller and darker. Inside, the desert tomb cleaners work in near silence. Their job is strange, morbid, and sacred. They clean and maintain ancient burial chambers, removing dust, insects, and debris to preserve the resting places of the dead. You watch one man, bent low, sweeping sand from an engraved wall with a soft reed brush. His torchlight flickers over hieroglyphs of kings long forgotten. The air smells of old stone and oil. One of the workers looks up briefly, his face smeared with dust, eyes reflecting the torch's flame. Even the dead need care, you can almost hear him say in your head. Scholars still debate whether tomb cleaners were considered holy servants or expendable laborers, but their devotion is unmistakable. Each gesture is reverent, careful not to disturb what has been sealed for centuries. The act feels almost like prayer. Outside, the wind picks up, carrying grains of sand that sting lightly against your skin. You can see distant torches flickering by the cliffs. The stone quarry slaves are still working even under the moonlight. The sound of chisels against limestone echoes through the night, rhythmic and relentless. Every strike is a heartbeat of civilization, every shard of stone a whisper of something greater being built. You imagine the weight of those stones, the heat of the day, the endless repetition. The workers here are strong but worn, their movement slow yet steady. They are the hands behind the monuments, their names unrecorded, their bodies bent to serve eternity. Scholars still argue whether slaves or paid laborers built the great monuments, but the exhaustion etched on these men's faces suggests the truth is far more complex
and far more human. The wind howls softly as you return to the quieter parts of the settlement. You pass the perfumer's shop, its sweet scent cutting through the dust. Inside, artisans crush blossoms and mix oils by lamplight. The smell is intoxicating, delicate yet powerful. You think of the contradiction, such beauty born from labor as tiring as any other. A small group of funeral singers walks past, wrapped in dark linen shawls. Their voices drift softly through the air, low and mournful, yet oddly comforting. They practice hymns of mourning for ceremonies that will take place tomorrow. You realize that in Egypt, even grief is an occupation. Scholars still argue whether professional mourners were respected or mocked, but their haunting songs carry something eternal, a human need to give pain a shape and rhythm. The moon dips lower. The night smells of yeast, incense, and sand. You realize that you've wandered through a world where every sound, scent, and gesture holds centuries of history. Every worker, from brewer to tomb cleaner to singer, sustains a civilization that still fascinates the world, and yet none of them will ever be remembered by name. As the wind calms and the village grows quiet again, you can almost hear the Nile breathing, a slow, eternal rhythm that echoes through every human hand that ever touched its banks.
The night deepens. The torches burn lower, their smoke curling into the cool desert air as you move toward the cliffs beyond the village. A faint glow flickers from crevices carved into the rock, and the soft scrape of straw brooms against stone greets your ears. Here, at the edge of silence, you find the desert tomb cleaners again, those anonymous custodians of eternity. They work slowly and deliberately, sweeping centuries of dust from the mouths of tombs. Each movement releases a puff of pale sand that shimmers briefly in the torchlight before disappearing into the night. The men and women here rarely speak. They bend low, faces covered with cloth to keep the dust from their lungs, and their eyes are steady, accustomed to darkness. You crouch beside one worker who's gently polishing a wall etched with faint hieroglyphs. The symbols are almost gone, worn by time and wind, but the reverence in the cleaner's movements makes them shine again. It's eerie, this devotion to the long dead. Scholars still argue whether tomb cleaning was considered an act of piety or a practical service to keep the tombs from collapsing, but as you watch them, it feels almost like worship. These people tend to eternity itself, preserving memory against decay. You notice offerings, tiny bowls of oil, bits of bread left near the entrances, tokens of respect or superstition. No one can say for sure. Inside one of the tomb chambers, the air is cool and heavy. The smell of old limestone mixes with the faint tang of ancient incense. A worker brushes away spiderwebs from a carved statue, the figure of a forgotten official whose face has eroded into something both human and ghostly. Every sweep of the brush feels like a heartbeat echoing in the hollow dark. The worker hums softly, a sound that barely exists, yet it fills the chamber with a fragile kind of peace. When you emerge back into the open, the wind greets you like a whisper. Down by the quarry, you hear the rhythmic clang of chisels, stone quarry laborers toiling even at this hour. You walk toward the sound, drawn by its stubborn persistence. The quarry is a vast open wound in the earth, shimmering with pale light under the moon. Men strike at blocks of limestone, muscles tensing with every blow. Their tools spark faintly when they hit flint seams. The rhythm of their work is ancient and relentless. Thud, scrape, crack, pause. You stand still, listening. Every block they cut could become part of a temple, a statue, or a tomb. Yet none of them will ever see the finished work. A young worker pauses to wipe his brow, his face streaked with dust that looks like white paint. Another hums a work song, barely audible over the clatter of stone. Scholars still debate whether the great monuments were built by slaves or paid workers. But watching them now, you sense something beyond both categories: endurance. The kind born not from loyalty or freedom, but necessity. Nearby, an overseer walks past with a torch, his expression unreadable. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. The workers know their pace, their quota, their danger. One wrong move and a stone could crush a man. Yet they continue, hour after hour, shaping the bones of eternity with tools that barely hold together. When dawn comes, these workers will sleep briefly under scraps of linen, then rise again to the same sound, the same rhythm. And in time, their work will outlast them all. As you turn to leave, you catch the faint shimmer of something along the horizon, the Nile, glinting like liquid glass. The wind carries the distant scent of yeast, leather, and smoke from the village below. Every job, from tomb cleaner to quarryman to perfumer, is connected by this pulse of human persistence. The night has its own heartbeat, and it sounds like chisel against stone. You pause to listen one last time before you descend the rocky path. The clangs fade, replaced by the hush of the desert, vast and eternal. Somewhere behind you, the workers keep chiseling, shaping pieces of forever. The dawn arrives gently, spreading gold over the desert like a veil. You walk along the bank of the Nile, watching fishermen prepare their boats. The water glows pink in the first light, calm yet hiding its strength. Today you find yourself among the fish processors, the ones who work behind the scenes, cleaning, salting, drying, and storing fish for temple offerings and daily meals alike. You step into a long open shed made of palm beams and reeds. The smell hits you instantly, sharp, briny, mixed with the faint sweetness of decay. Rows of fish lie split open on woven mats, glistening in the morning sun. Women crouch over them, deftly scraping scales with shells. Men carry heavy baskets of fresh catch from the boats, their feet leaving wet prints on the packed earth. There's a rhythm to it. Scrape, salt, lay flat. Scrape, salt, lay flat. The workers barely talk, but their movements speak of routine carved deep into muscle memory. You crouch beside a young boy sprinkling coarse salt into the bellies of catfish. His hands move quickly, almost tenderly. Scholars still argue whether this trade was seen as respectable or lowly, but as you watch the boy's quiet concentration, it feels like both: humble, necessary, eternal. Further inside, an older man turns fish over wooden racks to dry. The air hums with flies and heat. He hums too, softly, the same kind of tune you heard among the brewers, a melody that seems to help the body forget the ache. You wonder if songs were Egypt's earliest form of timekeeping, marking labor not with clocks, but with verses and breaths. Outside, smoke drifts from clay ovens where fish are being smoked over acacia wood. The smell mingles with the scent of the river, a strange, nostalgic fragrance, like the ghost of a seaside town long gone. You watch as a group of women tie dried fish into bundles with reeds, ready for trade. Some will go to local markets, others to temples as offerings to the gods. Even the divine, it seems, has a taste for human sweat. As you follow the narrow path between drying racks, you nearly stumble over a low table covered in strange tools: blades, shells, bone needles, and thin cords. A man sits there, repairing fishing nets. His fingers move like a spider weaving silk. Every knot is perfect, symmetrical. He doesn't look up but mutters under his breath, something like a prayer or curse. You realize that even here, precision is a kind of devotion. Farther along the shore, two men argue loudly over a catch count. Their voices echo across the water. It's a reminder that ancient labor wasn't just toil, it was tension, competition, survival. Scholars still debate whether Nile fishing was controlled by the state or by local guilds,
But in this moment, it feels entirely human. Someone always gets shorted. Someone always wants more. The sun climbs higher. The smell intensifies. You feel the weight of the heat pressing against your skin. You can't help but think that these workers, the fish cutters, salters, and smokers, rarely get mentioned in grand histories. No temples for them, no carvings on stone walls, yet their work feeds everyone from farmers to pharaohs. You pause near the water's edge. The Nile flows silently, carrying tiny ripples of reflected light. A heron glides by, landing gracefully on a patch of reeds. The world feels ancient and alive all at once. You think of how every task in this civilization, no matter how small, fits together like the stones of a pyramid. The sweat of one worker keeps another breathing. The labor of one night sustains the day to come. The workers behind you start singing again, a slow, steady tune that rises with the wind. Their voices blend with the river's murmur, creating something strangely peaceful. You close your eyes and listen. It's not beautiful in the usual sense, but it's real. And in that rawness, there's a kind of quiet grace. When you open your eyes, the world glows brighter. The sun glints off the scales of fish drying on the racks, turning them silver and gold. You realize that this smell, this sound, this shimmering sweat is the invisible pulse of ancient Egypt. The monuments may tell the story of gods and kings, but it's the fish processors, the brewers, the quarrymen, and the cleaners who kept that story alive. You take one last breath of the river air before walking back toward the village, the sound of the workers' song fading behind you like a memory. By midday, the sun turns harsh, drenching the desert in a white blaze that makes every shadow seem alive. You find yourself drawn back into the heart of the settlement, following a trail of smoke and chatter. The air here smells of metal and fire, sharp, earthy, alive. You've entered the world of the metalworkers, the quiet magicians who turn raw earth into tools, ornaments, and weapons. Their workshop is a hive of sound. Hammers ring against bronze, the hiss of molten metal hits water, and voices call orders through the smoke. You watch a man pull a glowing lump from the furnace, his skin shimmering with sweat. He places it on a stone anvil, raises his hammer, and strikes. Sparks burst like tiny stars. Every strike feels ritualistic, not violent, but deliberate, like he's coaxing the metal to reveal something hidden within. You notice that none of them wear shoes. Their feet are hardened from heat and sand, their hands calloused into tools themselves. There's something strangely serene about it, this chaos of precision. One worker melts copper in a small crucible, while another adds tin, muttering, "Palance is everything." Scholars still argue whether Egyptian bronze making was discovered by accident or design, but the result here is undeniable. Mastery born of endless repetition. At a side table, a woman polishes small copper mirrors, rubbing each surface with sand and oil until it gleams. You catch your reflection briefly. Warped, ghostly, like a face half buried in time. She smiles faintly before turning back to her work. Behind her, apprentices pump the bellows, keeping the fire alive. It roars, devouring air and sweat and time itself. Everywhere around you, movement and purpose merge into something almost sacred. You realize that this place is both creation and destruction. Ore becomes tool. Fire becomes shape. Chaos becomes order. You watch a craftsman pour liquid bronze into a mold shaped like a cobra's head. When it cools, he cracks the clay open to reveal a gleaming serpent, perfect in detail. He doesn't even look at it before tossing it aside to cool. Art is routine here, not miracle. You wander deeper where older men sit cross-legged repairing tools and sharpening blades. Their conversation drifts between work and gossip. Who's been paid? Who hasn't? Which overseer shouted too much today? It's strangely comforting, this slice of normalcy in an otherwise timeless world. You realize that even in antiquity, the workplace banter never really changes. As you step outside, the air hits cooler against your skin. You pass a group of children carrying scraps of discarded bronze toward another hut. Inside, women reheat and reshape the remnants into small household items: pins, clasps, amulets. Nothing here goes to waste. Scholars still argue whether Egyptian metal recycling was intentional or necessity-driven, but the efficiency is unmistakable. The clangs behind you soften as you walk farther. The scent of burning metal gives way to something earthier: wet clay and ash. You find yourself near the potters, their wheels spinning steadily under the shade of palm roofs. The sound is hypnotic. The whir of a wheel, the slap of wet clay, the faint hum of concentration. One man molds a small jar, his hands steady, eyes half closed. The clay glistens under the sun, smooth and alive. Another worker decorates a finished pot with red pigment, painting delicate spirals and lotus petals. These are not artists seeking glory, just workers meeting quotas. But the beauty of their precision humbles you. A young girl carries a tray of unfired pots to the kiln, her feet careful not to trip. The air is hot, thick with the scent of smoke and earth. Inside the kiln, flames dance like trapped spirits. You watch as she slides each pot in, whispering softly under her breath. Maybe a prayer that the fire spares her work. Scholars still debate whether such prayers were superstition or habit. But here, it feels like hope. Fragile, practical, human. You linger by the kiln as the sky shifts from gold to amber. The workers move slower now, their bodies weighed down by the day. The rhythmic sounds fade one by one. The hammer, the wheel, the bellows. The settlement exhales. For a moment, you stand between two worlds, the glowing workshop behind you and the silent desert ahead. Both hum with the same truth. Everything in Egypt, from bronze to bread, from pottery to pyramids, was shaped by hands that never made history books. You take a slow breath, feeling the weight of heat, dust, and awe. The world seems ancient and intimate, all at once. You begin to walk again, guided by the low hum of a worker's lullaby echoing through the twilight.
You drift away from the smoky warmth of the kitchen toward the cool stillness of a narrow passageway, where the flickering glow of oil lamps reveals walls etched with faint carvings. You've entered the world of embalmers and body washers, the people whose daily job was to touch death and somehow make it beautiful. The air here smells of resin, salt, and something else, sharp like the edge of a storm. You hear water trickling softly somewhere, and the low murmur of voices. In front of you, a group of men are bent over a stone table. On it lies a human form, wrapped in linen from the waist down. One man carefully adjusts the folds of cloth, while another grinds something dark and sticky in a bowl. You stand quietly, watching the ritual. There's no fear here, no grimness, just patience. The embalmers work with the same rhythm you saw in the kitchens. Steady, focused, precise. But instead of feeding the living, they're preparing the dead. A young apprentice wipes sweat from his brow and turns toward a large jar, carefully removing its lid. The scent of natron, the mineral salt used to dry the body, fills the room. He begins to sprinkle it over the linen, his hands shaking slightly. The older man beside him watches closely, but says nothing.
You realize this is how the knowledge has been passed down for centuries, not through books or rules, but repetition and correction. Scholars still argue whether embalmers were respected specialists or feared outcasts. But watching them, you sense something deeper, a quiet pride, a belief that they were the last bridge between life and eternity. One of the men hums softly as he works. The sound echoes against the walls, low and haunting, almost like a lullaby for the departed. The body glistens faintly under the oil lamp light, wrapped tighter with every pass of the linen. You can almost feel the stillness deepen with each layer. In a corner of the room, an older woman kneels beside a wooden basin, washing the tools in scented water. Her movements are slow but sure, her eyes calm. You realize she's cleaning the same knives and hooks that moments ago touched flesh. Yet she handles them with care, almost reverence, as if they too deserve rest. The embalmer's assistant pours resin into a small copper pot, heating it over a flame until it liquefies. The smell turns heavy, almost sweet. He brushes it along the linen with a reed brush, sealing the wrapping. The heat makes his face shine, and you can see faint burn scars on his wrists, reminders that even sacred work leaves marks. At one point, a priest enters, chanting softly. His voice fills the room, bouncing off the stone, mixing with the smell of resin and salt. The embalmers pause, heads bowed. You can't understand the words, but the tone is clear. It's a call for peace, for the soul's safe passage. Then, as quickly as he came, the priest leaves, and the room returns to its quiet rhythm of labor. You move closer to the wall and notice faint drawings, scenes of the underworld, jackal-headed figures guiding the dead, boats gliding on rivers of stars. It's both art and instruction. You trace the carvings with your eyes, realizing how fragile belief can look when scratched into stone. One of the embalmers steps back, wiping his hands on a piece of linen. "Done," he murmurs. The others nod. They begin to lift the wrapped body carefully onto a wooden board, ready for transport to the tomb. Their faces are expressionless, but their movements, slow, synchronized, speak of familiarity, not detachment. They've done this hundreds of times, maybe thousands. A cat slips silently through the doorway, tail high, eyes glinting. It pauses, looks at the embalmers, then disappears again. You can't help but smile. Life weaving casually through death. It's such an Egyptian thing to happen that it almost feels scripted. As the men cleaned their tools, they talked quietly about mundane things. Food, children, the rising price of barley. You realize that for them, death is just another part of life's long to-do list. You envy that calm acceptance. The apprentice gathers leftover linen scraps, tossing them into a basket. You notice a small piece that falls near your feet. White, stiff with resin. When you touch it, it crackles slightly, brittle but enduring. You think about how even this fragment will probably outlive everyone in the room. The night deepens outside, and the lamps burn lower. The workers begin to leave one by one, bowing slightly toward the prepared body as they go. You follow them into the courtyard. The stars shimmer above, clear and cold. The Nile glints faintly in the distance, reflecting the same constellations that the dead were meant to sail toward. Somewhere, a dog barks. A wind stirs the sand. You realize that even after all this, the wrapping, the resin, the prayers, life continues with the same indifferent rhythm. But maybe that's the point. The embalmers didn't fight death. They made it manageable, predictable, almost domestic. You take one last look at the flickering doorway behind you,
the faint smell of resin still clinging to the air. For a job nobody wanted, it carried an incredible kind of peace. The morning sun is just a pale smear over the horizon when you find yourself walking along the canal banks, the water calm and reflective. You hear faint shouting ahead, sharp and tense, and you realize you've stumbled upon the town crier and messenger network, the ancient Egyptian equivalent of mailmen, newsboys, and early bureaucrats. Their work is chaotic, frantic, and completely essential. A group of young men carries scrolls and clay tablets, running from house to house, temple to palace. Their legs are dusted in ochre sand, and the reeds in their baskets rattle like bones. One trips, dropping a tablet that cracks sharply. He curses under his breath, kneeling to retrieve it, but another hands him a spare. No time is wasted in apologies. Messages must reach the pharaoh, the temple, the farmers. Scholars still debate whether this network was formal or informal, but its precision is undeniable. You follow a boy with a reed basket strapped to his chest. He climbs a low wall, leaps down, and runs toward a house where a small crowd gathers. Inside, the local scribe waits impatiently, tapping a reed against a wooden desk. You watch him take a tablet from the boy's hands, inspect the ink, nod, and hand it off again. Each movement calculated, practiced, rehearsed endlessly. The shouts grow louder near the market square. Here, the bell ringers and town announcers are calling news, a new tax decree, the arrival of grain shipments, the upcoming festival for a local deity. One man pounds a small bronze gong, while another bellows through a reed horn, his voice echoing across rooftops. The townspeople pause mid-step, listening intently, gestures frozen for the briefest moment. Even in this noisy chaos, you notice an order, a rhythm designed to inform without causing panic. A young girl carries a message to the nearby temple. She ducks under hanging linen banners and past children playing with sticks. Her hands are raw from carrying baskets, her breath quick, yet her expression is focused, determined. This is her world. Speed, memorization, and endurance. She barely notices you as you follow her path. Scholars still argue whether women were regularly involved in this kind of work or only in emergencies. But here she is, a living testament to adaptability and necessity. You stop near a canal bridge and notice the river signaling system in operation. A man waves a flag with distinct patterns, communicating news to the opposite bank. It's mesmerizing, simple, crude, but effective. The combination of written messages, runners, and visual signals forms a network that keeps an entire city informed, alive, and coordinated. Beyond the bridge, an older messenger sits resting on a stone ledge, reed scrolls piled at his feet. He dips his hands in the canal water, shaking his head with a tired smile. He murmurs softly to a friend, words lost in the morning air. You can imagine him repeating the same ritual for decades, the rhythm of duty ingrained in his bones. The market is alive now. Merchants wave, buyers haggle, children dart between baskets of fruit. The messenger network weaves through it all, unnoticed yet critical. You realize that without these runners, these bell ringers, these scribes, chaos would reign, even in a civilization famed for pyramids and temples. A sudden shout draws your attention to a boy racing toward a temple gate. He trips, lands hard, and the tablet slips from his hands. The crowd gasps, but he scrambles, picking it up and sprinting forward again. You notice the same grim determination in every messenger. No matter the fall, the message must go through. The sun climbs higher. Sweat glistens on their foreheads. Dust sticks to their skin. And yet the rhythm persists. Run, deliver, report, run again. They are unseen lifelines, the arteries through which information flows, connecting everyone from the lowliest laborer to the highest priest. As you step back, the shouts fade,
replaced by the soft lap of water against the canal's edge. The town's pulse continues, a living, breathing network of human effort, tireless and invisible. You realize that in ancient Egypt, messages traveled faster than the wind, yet every delivery depended on bodies, not magic. And when the morning haze lifts, the messengers disperse, leaving the city orderly again, as if nothing happened. But you know better. Without them, civilization itself might stumble. The sun has climbed higher, painting the town in sharp gold and casting long shadows from the temple pillars. You follow the winding streets toward a quieter district where the scent of herbs, smoke, and wet clay mingles. Here you discover the perfume makers, artisans whose work seems frivolous at first, but whose products carried power, prestige, and even protection. The workshop is small, warm, and filled with jars of dried flowers, crushed resins, and oils extracted from rare plants. A man sits cross-legged on the floor, pounding frankincense into a fine powder. His fingers move with surprising delicacy for such a repetitive task, brushing away stray granules with the tip of a reed. Another woman kneels nearby, carefully mixing rose oil with a resin base, her expression focused, almost meditative. Scholars still argue whether perfumes were primarily cosmetic or ritualistic, but here, each jar holds both function and devotion. You bend closer to watch her pour a small amount of mixture into a clay container. The scent rises immediately, rich, floral, slightly sharp, and utterly intoxicating. She swirls it with a reed, then closes the jar with a practiced snap. These small, precious creations will travel from palace to temple, an invisible bridge between humans and gods. A boy carries bundles of lotus flowers, tossing them into a large mortar. He grins at you briefly, then resumes pounding the petals into a fragrant paste. You notice his hands, tender and uncalloused, yet steady. It's a strange juxtaposition, delicacy and endurance. Every motion is measured, repeated hundreds of times, yet infused with care. The workshop hums with quiet chatter. One woman murmurs softly to another about the quality of last week's saffron shipment. A man notes that certain oils must be kept cool or they will spoil. The air smells thick with incense and the tang of citrus. You inhale deeply, feeling dizzy and serene at the same time. Nearby, an apprentice carefully filters a mixture through a fine cloth. The liquid drips slowly into a vessel, clear and shimmering. You imagine that every drop represents hours of labor, centuries of knowledge passed down from teacher to student. Scholars still debate whether perfumers enjoyed social prestige or worked in obscurity, but standing here, the line between lowly labor and sacred craft seems blurred. Outside, the sunlight warms the courtyard, and a soft breeze carries the scent of freshly crushed herbs through the air. You follow it to a small terrace where women are drying petals in the sun, laying them in thin, organized lines. The ritual of preparation feels almost ceremonial. The smallest error could ruin a batch, yet mistakes are rare. Their discipline is quiet but unwavering. You notice a tall man pouring scented oils into small, ornate bottles for distribution. Each jar is labeled with tiny marks indicating scent, origin, and intended use. Some will go to priests, some to the wealthy, and some to ordinary villagers. A silent network connecting every level of society. He handles them like treasure, setting each one aside, adjusting lids to ensure no air escapes. Scholars still argue whether perfume in ancient Egypt was worn primarily for attraction, hygiene, or protection, but in this workshop, its value is practical, spiritual, and social all at once. Every gesture you witness, grinding, mixing, pouring, carries the weight of expectation and ritual. As you step toward the doorway, the sunlight catches a small jar of amber resin. Its surface glimmers with golden flecks. You can almost feel the hands that pounded, sifted, and mixed it, the years of care and labor embedded in every tiny crystal. It is a luxury born from endurance, a whisper of elegance in a harsh, sun-drenched world. The women pause, murmuring as they pack the final jars for transport. The fragrance lingers long after you step outside, blending with the river breeze, the dust, and the distant clang of metal from the workshops. You realize that, like so many other laborers, the perfumer's work will outlive them, carried forward in scent and memory, long after the sweat has dried. The city stretches before you, alive with toil and rhythm. Somewhere children play among baskets, oxen graze, and temple bells chime faintly. The world continues, built on invisible hands, delicate and enduring, like the perfume that lingers in the air.
By mid-afternoon, the sun has climbed high and the air shimmers with heat. You wander toward the outskirts of the settlement, where the horizon meets endless dunes. Here lies the domain of street cleaners and waste handlers, workers whose job is unpleasant yet indispensable, keeping the city from choking on its own detritus. The first thing you notice is the smell, faintly sour, earthy, and unmistakably human. Men and women sweep courtyards, alleyways, and streets, gathering discarded straw, broken pottery, and food scraps into large woven baskets. Their brooms are simple, bundles of reeds tied together, but in their hands they are instruments of survival. You watch the rhythm, sweep, gather, dump, repeat, a cadence as ancient as the city itself. A boy stoops to pick up a shard of broken jar, examining it briefly before tossing it into a basket. His fingers are rough, scraped by years of contact with sand and debris. Scholars still debate whether these workers were outcasts or part of the labor hierarchy, but here you can see the dignity in the act. Sanitation is survival, and the city depends on it. Nearby, a woman kneels to collect food scraps for pigs and chickens. She hums softly as she works, her voice low and repetitive. The animals follow her, pecking and snuffling, turning waste into nourishment. There's a quiet poetry in it, the discarded feeding the living, cycles repeating unseen yet essential. You notice a man carrying a clay jar of ashes, moving carefully to sprinkle them over a particularly muddy street. His steps are deliberate, and he pauses occasionally, adjusting his load. Scholars still argue whether ash was used purely for cleanliness or also for symbolic purification, but standing here, you feel both purposes intertwine seamlessly. A group of children dart past, laughing, weaving between the workers. The adults barely notice. The laughter is a background hum, absorbed into the rhythm of labor. One child trips, and the woman with the scraps helps him up, brushing dust from his knees. In a harsh, sun-baked world, small gestures of care persist quietly. The streets shimmer with heat. You see men scraping the remains of fish and bread into clay pits, which will later be used as compost or feed. Others carry away broken tools and pottery to be melted down or reshaped. Nothing is wasted. Nothing escapes human hands. Even the city's dirt is managed with care, transformed into purpose. You follow a narrow alley where a young man sweeps constantly, his eyes focused, his movements hypnotic. He pauses only to drink from a clay jar. You realize that this seemingly endless work, invisible to most, underpins the entire settlement. Without it, disease, chaos, and decay would rise. These workers are the silent backbone of daily life. In a wider courtyard, women are cleaning temple floors, washing away incense residue, stray grains, and the occasional dropped offering. Their movements are precise, methodical. They work quietly, chatting softly, sometimes glancing at a distant priest who passes, carrying scrolls or sacred objects. Even here, hierarchy is subtle, invisible, but acknowledged. Scholars still argue whether waste workers held low social status or were integrated into the urban structure. But watching their expertise, you see pride. They understand the city's pulse, which path collects the most refuse, which bins to empty first, how to prevent vermin from spreading. Knowledge like this is unrecorded, yet vital. As the sun begins its descent, casting long orange shadows across the alleyways, the workers pause to stretch, wipe sweat from their brows, and sip from clay jugs. The city exhales with them. Dust settles, the air cools slightly, and for a moment, the streets feel clean, orderly, even sacred. You step back, looking over the neat paths and organized piles, realizing that civilization itself relies not only on temples and palaces, but on these quiet, uncelebrated hands. The wind stirs the sand, carrying whispers of labor past and present, reminding you that nothing grand exists without the humblest work behind it. The sun sinks behind the dunes, and the sky turns into a bruised gradient of violet and amber. The workers retreat toward their homes, leaving behind a faint haze of smoke and dust that glows in the fading light. You wander deeper into the quieter alleys of the settlement, where the smells shift, less of fire and sweat, more of plants, resins, and something faintly medicinal. You've stumbled into the domain of the embalmers. The building ahead of you is simple, but carries an aura of unease. Outside, bundles of linen hang drying on wooden racks, their pale folds fluttering gently in the breeze. The air is sharp with the scent of natron, that chalky, salty mineral used to dry bodies. A priest in dark linen passes you, his head shaved clean, his eyes solemn but calm. You follow, cautious, your footsteps muffled by sand. Inside, the light dims. Oil lamps flicker over polished stone tables. The atmosphere is silent, reverent, though beneath it, there's the unmistakable hum of routine. You expect fear or horror, but what you feel instead is discipline. Each motion is measured, each breath controlled. One man pours oil over a wrapped body. Another grinds herbs into powder. The air carries 1,000-year-old ritual made ordinary through repetition. You notice a jar half filled with dark resin, its surface shimmering like honey. The embalmer dips his brush and paints thin lines across the linen wrappings, sealing them layer by layer. His expression doesn't change. For him, death is not a mystery, it's a schedule. You can almost hear the internal rhythm: dry, wash, anoint, wrap, repeat. Scholars still argue whether embalmers were feared or respected, servants of gods, or simply workers of necessity. But here, standing among them, you sense both awe and fatigue. They are guardians of immortality, yet mortal themselves. Their craft keeps the powerful eternal, while their own names dissolve into sand. In a corner, a young apprentice mixes oils, cedar, myrrh, frankincense, their fragrances cutting through the sharpness of salt and decay. He glances up, meets your gaze for a heartbeat, then looks away, focused again on his work. Perhaps he's thinking not of the dead before him, but of his supper waiting at home, of his small cot in the shadows beyond the temple walls. There's a faint sound, not the scrape of tools, but humming. An old woman hums softly as she folds linen strips. Her voice is cracked and gentle. It fills the room like incense, rising and fading with the rhythm of her hands. It's a lullaby for the dead, or maybe for herself. You move closer to a table where a priest draws hieroglyphics on a papyrus strip, a name meant to travel with the soul. The ink smells faintly of soot. He pauses, lifts the pen, and whispers something. A short prayer, low and tired. You realize he said those same words 1,000 times before. It no longer feels like a sacred act, but like breathing. Outside, the evening wind begins to pick up, carrying grains of sand that swirl through the open doorway. You step back out, the air cool against your skin. The sky is darker now, filled with stars scattered like powdered glass. Across from the embalmer's tent, you notice another small workshop, lit dimly by torches. Inside, men are making coffins, carpenters shaping sycamore wood into long, narrow forms. The sound of chisels and saws blends with the rhythmic beat of mallets. Their movements are graceful despite the fatigue. Each stroke is deliberate, guided by experience. One worker paints the surface with yellow pigment. Another inscribes tiny eyes near the head so the soul can see. You realize that death in this place is an industry. Every step, from cleaning to wrapping to carving coffins, employs hands that will never be remembered. Scholars still debate whether Egypt's obsession with death reflected faith or control, but walking among these people, it feels simpler. It was survival. Death was the one customer that never stopped paying. As the night thickens, the workers finish their tasks. They wash their hands in bowls of water, wiping away resin and paint. The fires dim. The last hammer falls silent. You watch one man stretch his arms, yawning. He glances once at the completed coffin, nods as if to say, "Done for today," and steps outside. The air outside is still, heavy with scent. Oil, wood, salt, dust. You follow the sound of crickets toward the river. The stars shimmer on the Nile's surface, and you feel the pulse of this land, ancient, methodical, endlessly human. Behind every myth of gods and golden tombs lies this quiet truth. The hands that made them were tired. The eyes that saw them were ordinary, and the lives behind them were fleeting. The breeze brushes against your cheek, cool and gentle now. You take a slow breath. Somewhere behind you, the embalmers whisper a final prayer for the night, their words lost to the sand. The next morning begins not with sunlight, but with sound. A slow, rhythmic thump that rolls through the air like a heartbeat. You follow it through the narrow paths of the workers' village until you emerge into a wide, open yard. There, among piles of reeds and unfinished blocks, the mud brick makers are already at work. They stand ankle-deep in mud, their skin shining in the early heat, stomping steadily as water and clay mix beneath their feet. It's almost musical. Squelch, slap, pat, repeat. One man shouts a joke that makes the others laugh briefly before the rhythm resumes. You can smell the Nile here, that wet, fertile scent of earth that's both alive and ancient. Nearby, a young boy carries straw bundles, tossing handfuls into the mud. The workers mix it in with their feet, the straw acting as the skeleton of the bricks, giving the soft clay strength. The air hums with insects, and the sound of sandals slapping against wet earth merges with the distant calls of birds. It's a symphony of labor, uncelebrated, but essential. You watch as they press the mixture into wooden molds. Each frame produces 4 bricks at a time, neat and identical. The men lift them carefully and flip them onto the ground to dry under the sun. Row after row of fresh bricks stretch out like a miniature city, glistening, wet, and uniform. In a day or two, these will harden and form the very walls that shelter nobles, temples, and storage halls. Scholars still argue whether the brickmakers were slaves or skilled craftsmen employed by the state, but here in the heat, such distinctions feel meaningless. Each swing of an arm, each step into the mud feels like an act of endurance. These are the bones of civilization. Humble, heavy, handmade. A small argument breaks out between 2 men over whose batch dries faster. The supervisor, an older man with a deep tan and weary eyes, intervenes calmly, his tone more paternal than harsh. You realize that this hierarchy, even among laborers, is ancient too. Every order balanced between authority and survival. You kneel to touch a half-dried brick. It's warm and rough, the straw poking out like veins. A worker notices your curiosity and smirks. "That's a good one," you imagine him saying. "Might last longer than any of us." He's probably right. Further down, another group tends to brick transporters, workers who carry dried bricks in woven baskets balanced on their shoulders. Their backs are bent, their steps slow but practiced. They walk the same path all day long, from yard to site, under the merciless sun. You can hear their breath, labored but steady, merging with the wind. Scholars still debate how many bricks it took to build the great temples and pyramids, but standing here, among the endless rows, the answer feels infinite. It's as though Egypt itself was built one exhausted breath at a time. As the sun climbs higher, the yard turns into a mirror of heat. The mud darkens, the workers' shadows grow short. They pause briefly for water. A few sips from clay jars shared among them. No ceremony, no rest, just necessity. Then, as if by instinct, they return to the mud. The cycle continues. You wander toward the river where a smaller team scoops silt directly from the Nile's edge. Their shovels bite into the wet soil, bringing up chunks of earth glistening like obsidian. This mud is life itself, the same that grows the crops, that nourishes the gods, that forms the walls around every dream of immortality. One of the men laughs, holding up a handful of wet clay. "This," he seems to say, "is Egypt." He's right again. The pharaoh's throne, the scribe's house, the brewer's jar, all of it begins here, between bare feet and river water. When the afternoon shadows stretch, the workers begin to sing. The song is simple, rhythmic, matching the steady stamping of their feet. You can't understand the words, but the melody is soothing, old, patient. It's a hymn to labor itself, a lullaby for the living. As you step away, the wind shifts and carries with it the scent of drying clay. You glance back once more. The workers are still at it, their movements timeless, their bodies caked in the very material that will outlast them. The mud glistens under the sun like melted gold, and for a moment you realize immortality isn't only carved in stone, it's baked in clay. The sound of their stamping fades behind you as you walk toward the distant temple walls, the heat softening everything into a golden blur. By the time you reach the outskirts of the settlement, the air is thick with dust and the low murmur of voices. You follow the scent of straw and animal musk to a large pen built from mud brick walls and wooden fences. Inside, the animal handlers are beginning their long day. Goats bleat, donkeys bray, and oxen shuffle their hooves against the ground, kicking up golden dust that glows in the sunlight. A young man stands in the middle of it all, holding a long reed staff, guiding a line of oxen toward the water troughs. He moves calmly, murmuring softly under his breath, not words of command, but a kind of rhythmic hum that keeps the animals docile. You can tell he's been doing this since childhood. His steps are confident, his gestures precise. The oxen respond like they understand him. Nearby, a group of women are milking goats into clay jars. Their hands move quickly, practiced, the soft rhythm of milk hitting pottery, blending with the animal sounds. The smell is strong, earthy, alive. It's the scent of daily survival. Scholars still argue whether animal handlers were considered servants of the temples or private workers for nobles, but here it's obvious they're both, caretakers of wealth and lifelines of labor. You watch as a boy pours feed from a woven basket into a long wooden trough. A cloud of grain dust rises, catching the light like smoke. He sneezes, laughs, and wipes his nose on his sleeve before returning to work. His father shouts something from across the pen, and though you can't understand the words, the tone is unmistakably universal. Get back to work. The animals here aren't pets or symbols, they're engines. The oxen will plow fields, the donkeys will carry grain, and the goats will provide milk and hides. Everything has a purpose, and every purpose depends on someone's exhaustion. You realize that the worker's world is a cycle. Care, feed, clean, repeat. There's no finish line, only the next sunrise. A little farther down, two handlers lead a pair of sacred bulls toward a shaded enclosure. Their horns are painted gold, their hooves washed. You realize these are no ordinary animals. They're offerings for the temple priests. One handler adjusts the decorative cloth around a bull's neck, his face expressionless, almost reverent. He doesn't smile, but his movements are tender, like he's tending to something divine. Scholars still debate whether these animals were treated as gods or merely as vessels for ritual, but the silence of the handlers makes it clear. They believed in what they were doing. The heat intensifies. Flies buzz in thick clouds, and the air hums with the sound of movement, hooves, breathing, the thud of hay being thrown. You step aside as two men drag a wooden sled loaded with feed bags. Their backs strain, their feet dig into the sand, but they keep going, not out of obedience, but momentum. You get the sense that once a day like this starts, it doesn't stop until the sun disappears. You pause near the water trough. The oxen drink slowly, their reflections shimmering in the ripples. You feel the weight of centuries in this simple act, human and animal bound in survival, one feeding the other's purpose. You can almost imagine the same scene thousands of years ago. Different faces, same sounds, same dust, same need. At the edge of the pen, a woman tends to a small lamb with an injured leg. She kneels in the dirt, wrapping the wound with linen soaked in oil. Her hands move with care, her eyes focused. You can tell she's done this before, many times. She murmurs softly to the lamb, her voice gentle, almost like a lullaby. For a moment, everything else fades, the heat, the noise, the smell, leaving only this quiet gesture of kindness in a brutal world. You move past her, toward a row of wooden cages. Inside are geese and ducks meant for sacrifice and food. Their cries are sharp and restless, and the workers move among them with practiced calm. You watch as one man marks the neck of a goose with ochre pigment, an offering perhaps. He pauses briefly, takes a slow breath, then continues. Scholars still argue whether the animal handlers of ancient Egypt were respected caretakers or simply invisible laborers, but as the sun begins to dip, you realize they were both, essential yet unseen. their lives intertwined with creatures that outlive their names. The pen grows quieter as dusk approaches. The animals settle, the workers wash their hands and faces in the river, their reflections rippling in the fading light. You follow their gaze westward, where the horizon glows orange, and the shadow of a heron drifts low over the water. The day ends not with a bell or command, but with exhaustion, that universal permission to stop. The handlers sit in the sand, sharing bits of bread, murmuring softly to one another. One laughs, another leans back and closes his eyes. You realize that in a world obsessed with eternity, these fleeting, tired moments were what truly lasted. The sky deepens into indigo, the stars begin to show, and somewhere in the distance, a cow lowing fades into the hum of night. You wake, or maybe drift, into the next part of the night, where the streets of the workers' district are alive again, but not with the noise of animals this time. Now it's the clatter of pots, the hiss of fire, the scent of meat, onions and lentils bubbling in clay jars. You've wandered into the world of temple kitchen workers, those whose job was to keep the gods and the priests well fed. The heat here is staggering. Fires blaze under large stone ovens, and the air ripples like water. You pass by a man kneeling beside a giant pot, stirring with a stick so long it looks like a spear. The pot smells like boiled barley mixed with herbs, and your stomach growls. He wipes the sweat from his face, muttering something under his breath, a little complaint to no one in particular. You notice that everything is rhythmic here. Chop, stir, knead, serve. A woman rolls dough on a smooth slab of stone, shaping it into flat discs that she slaps onto the oven wall. Another adds oil with a hollowed-out reed, her movement so quick it's almost hypnotic. Bread here isn't just food, it's a form of currency. Workers are paid with it, temples trade with it, life turns around it. You lean closer, watching how she tests the bread. A soft thump, a tiny puff of steam, then the bread is ready. She smiles faintly, then tosses it into a woven basket. You almost reach for one yourself, but stop, not because you're polite, but because the overseer standing behind her looks like he'd notice. He's dressed slightly better than the rest, a linen kilt with a faint sheen, a necklace of carved shell beads. He doesn't shout, but his eyes move sharply from worker to worker. You get the sense he's a man whose approval you want, even if you're not sure why. Nearby, two boys are pounding something with stone mortars, garlic maybe, or chickpeas. They talk quietly, their conversation half jokes, half complaints. You catch fragments about how the temple's high priest never finishes his beer, and how the leftover loaves get fed to the cats. They laugh quietly, but when the overseer looks their way, their hands move faster. A priest enters, his robes gleaming, the faint scent of incense trailing behind him. The workers instantly straighten. He doesn't speak much, just points to a tray of bread and roasted fish, inspecting the arrangement. You notice how carefully he lifts a single piece of bread, breaking it with his fingers before nodding approval. It's a strange ritual, half devotion, half dinner. Scholars still argue whether the food offered to gods was actually consumed or redistributed afterward, but watching this scene, you realize the line between divine offering and daily meal was blurred. The workers cook with reverence, yes, but also with hunger. They know that whatever the gods don't eat, the priests, and maybe they, will. The smell of roasted goose fills the air. You turn toward the pit where a man is basting meat with honey and beer. The glaze hisses as it hits the flame, the aroma deep and intoxicating. He grins when he sees you watching, gestures proudly toward the spit, and says something that sounds like, "For the gods, not for you." Then he winks, just barely. Around the edges of the courtyard, the kitchen's rhythm spills into the living spaces. Children chase each other between jars. A woman hums softly as she washes greens in a bowl of water that's already half mud. A cat slinks past, licking its lips, patient and confident that a scrap will fall. And it does. It always does. You notice how organized everything is here, despite the chaos. There's a hierarchy even in cooking. The head baker, the brewer, the butcher, the washer. Every task links to another like gears in a machine. Miss one rotation, and the temple's rituals falter. One man carries in a huge clay jug, sloshing with something golden, beer, the workers drink. He pours it into smaller jars, passing them around as the day ends. Laughter rises again, soft but real. Someone makes a joke about how the gods must be drunk by now, and everyone chuckles, careful not to let the overseer hear. You lean back against a wall, the smell of smoke and yeast wrapping around you. The kitchen is still bustling, but the sound has softened, the way everything does after dusk. The fires die down, replaced by the red glow of embers. The cooks sit together, eating from the same pots they stirred all day. Their faces are tired but content, shining with sweat and satisfaction. You realize something as you watch them. The food they make, the offerings they prepare, all of it connects the divine and the human. It's the same soup of devotion, exhaustion, and hunger. And maybe that's what made it sacred. A faint breeze stirs through the courtyard, carrying the scent of baked bread and ash. The last bit of sunlight flickers out, and the night settles in again, heavy, calm, and full of secrets.
The evening comes slow and golden as you wander past the bustling streets into a quieter corner of the city. Here, near the riverbank, the fishermen and net menders have gathered, preparing for nightfall and the river's next bounty. The smell of water, fish, and wet reeds fills the air, mingling with the faint scent of drawing mud and the ever-present dust from the streets. Men bend over nets, patching holes with practiced precision, weaving fibers together like threads of a secret language. Their fingers are nimble, calloused, and endlessly patient. Each repair could mean a full catch or an empty basket. Every knot is both survival and ritual. Scholars still argue whether fishing in ancient Egypt was primarily for sustenance or trade, but watching these men, it's clear their lives are tied to the river as surely as its currents flow. A boy wades ankle-deep into the water, lifting fish with his hands and dropping them into a shallow basket. The fish glisten in the last light, silver and slippery. He laughs when one escapes, splashing water toward a companion. Life and labor blend here seamlessly. Survival isn't grim, it's kinetic, fluid, alive. Nearby, women sort and clean the day's catch. Their hands move quickly, removing scales, separating species, and passing smaller fish into clay jars for storage. They hum softly, their voices rising and falling with the river's gentle lap. You realize this rhythm is ancient, practiced by countless generations, a music as real as the Nile itself. The fishermen share tools and advice, which bait works best, how to read the current, when the river is generous or stingy. Their knowledge is practical, honed through years of observation. One man tosses a repaired net back into the water, his body balanced perfectly as he guides it across the surface. The net lands with a quiet splash, and he smiles faintly, satisfied with the evening's labor. Scholars still debate whether certain fishing techniques were invented locally or borrowed from other Nile settlements, but in this moment, it doesn't matter. The work flows naturally, the river dictating the pace, the catch, the effort. Everything here is cyclical, deliberate, and intertwined with human necessity. You step closer to a fire where a small group is cooking the evening's catch over embers. Smoke curls into the air, mingling with the scent of wet mud and reeds. One man breaks off a piece of flatbread, dips it in oil, and tastes it, his expression calm and content. Life on the river balances between effort and reward, labor and small pleasures. Children run along the bank, chasing each other and tossing sticks into the water. A small dog paddles in after them, shaking water over the fishermen repairing a net. Laughter rises among the workers, blending seamlessly with the river's steady murmur. You notice that even in hard, unglamorous work,
there is room for joy, for rhythm, for community. The sun slips below the horizon, shadows lengthen, and stars begin to prick the indigo sky. Fires burn low, the smell of cooking fish drifts into the cool evening, and the river reflects both moonlight and torchlight like a living mirror. Scholars still debate whether fishing boats were seasonal or permanent, but standing here, you see continuity. The same hands, the same water, the same river, generation after generation. The fishermen begin to pack their tools, checking nets one last time, gathering baskets, and carrying everything back to small huts along the bank. The river, patient and eternal, waits for their return, promising sustenance, challenge, and life again tomorrow. You take a slow breath, inhaling the mixture of smoke, water, and wet mud, and feeling the pulse of labor that sustains an entire civilization. And as night fully settles, you realize these hands, rough and unseen, the ones that mend nets, lift fish, and guide the river's bounty, are as crucial to Egypt's greatness as any pharaoh or pyramid. Without them, the Nile's song would be silent, and the city's pulse would falter.
Night deepens across the settlement, and a cool breeze rises from the Nile, rustling reeds and carrying faint scents of mud, fish, and distant fires. You wander toward the far edge of the city, where the lamp makers and candle artisans work, shaping light itself in a world without electricity. Their hands are blackened with soot, their fingers coated in wax and tallow, yet the glow they create is soft, steady, and necessary. A man rolls candles from tallow, spinning each stick with precision before setting it aside to harden. Another dips thin reeds into molten wax, layering them carefully. The air smells faintly sweet, mingled with smoke. He hums softly, a low melodic rhythm that seems to echo the flicker of flame itself. Scholars still debate whether lamps were primarily functional or symbolic, but standing here, you can see they were both. Essential to survival, essential to ritual. Women sort wicks and measure lengths of prepared tallow. One young girl carries finished lamps to a low shelf, balancing them carefully. Each lamp is unique, a small vessel of hope, prepared to illuminate homes, temples, and workshops alike. You realize that these creations are more than light. They are tools of life, markers of safety, and companions in the long Egyptian nights. You watch as an older artisan mixes scented oils into molten wax, testing a small drop to see if it burns evenly. The scent is faint but penetrating, cinnamon, myrrh, and a hint of cedar. It's subtle magic, a ritual in motion. Even the smallest error could make the lamp useless, yet every movement is confident, honed through decades of repetition. The workshop hums quietly, workers exchanging nods and murmurs. A boy laughs when a small blob of wax falls to the floor, quickly kneeling to scoop it up. The humor is fleeting but present, a reminder that even in tedious labor, human spirit persists. You feel a strange reverence for the precision, the care, and the unseen value of their work. Outside, oil lamps glow along the streets. Their light dances on mud brick walls, illuminating the faces of laborers returning home from the day's work. You realize that these lamps are more than decoration. They guide feet, guard against accidents, and offer comfort against the darkness. Scholars still argue whether lamps were widely accessible or restricted to temples and wealthier households, but the streets themselves suggest something in between: function, necessity, and human ingenuity combined. A woman carefully sets a lamp on a balcony outside her home, her hands steady despite fatigue. She steps back and watches as the flame catches the wick, flickering softly against the night. Somewhere nearby, children whisper and giggle, drawn to the gentle glow. You notice that the labor behind this simple light is immense, yet it is invisible to most who benefit from it. The lamp makers begin to pack up for the night. Tools are cleaned, residual wax is scraped, and unused tallow is stored for tomorrow. The men and women move quietly, the rhythm of their day complete, but destined to repeat at dawn. Outside, the river reflects the scattered lamplight, and the city seems almost ethereal, a tapestry of shadows and soft illumination. You pause, taking a deep breath. The labor of the city's unseen hands, from embalmers to fishermen, kitchen workers to lamp makers, has constructed not just the tangible world, but the intangible rhythm of life itself. Each act, repetitive and unseen, builds civilization silently, enduringly, like a heartbeat beneath the grandeur of pyramids and temples. As the night deepens, you step away from the workshop, letting the lamplight fade behind you. Somewhere a dog barks faintly, a cat pads past, and the soft gurgle of the Nile reminds you that life continues, persistent and unwavering. You feel the pulse of history, labor, survival, and human ingenuity flowing beneath every street, every wall, every flickering flame. Now, as the city sleeps and the Nile whispers under the stars, you let your pace slow, feeling the weight of countless hands that built, cleaned, fed, and tended the world around you. The streets are quiet, and the air carries a cool hint of mud and river, mixed with the faint fragrance of herbs and incense that linger from a day's labor. Each breath you take seems to echo the rhythm of those ancient workers, their lives intersecting with yours across millennia. You imagine the embalmers carefully wrapping a body, the perfumers delicately pressing oils and flowers into tiny jars, the fishermen gently tossing their nets into the water, and the lamp makers coaxing light from wax. Their work, unseen and uncelebrated, hums quietly beneath the grandeur of temples and palaces. It's a gentle, persistent heartbeat that keeps civilization alive. The air grows softer, cooler. A gentle breeze stirs, carrying whispers of reeds, dust, and the distant hum of water. Somewhere, a dog pads quietly along an empty street. A cat curls on a doorstep, its tail flicking lazily. You feel the city breathe, alive yet resting, each laborer's rhythm settling into the calm of night. As you settle into this quiet, you notice how connected everything feels. Life, work, water, light, and even the soft glow of a candle in a window. The pulse of humanity continues, unseen but persistent, a comforting reminder that each small repetitive action contributes to the world's enduring flow. Let yourself sink into that thought. The warmth of the past, the quiet diligence of human hands, and the gentle hum of the river all cradle you. Every detail, from the smell of wet clay to the flicker of lamplight, dissolves into a soothing cadence. Close your eyes. Feel the rhythm of life moving softly beneath you. Imagine the Nile flowing endlessly, carrying whispers of labor, survival, and quiet triumph. Let your breath sink with it. Tonight, the stories of ancient Egypt, the odd, the unseen, the essential, fold gently around you like a blanket. Each sound, each smell, each flicker of light lulls you further into calm. You are safe. You are still. You are carried. Sleep now, carried on the hum of history, until the first rays of tomorrow brush your eyelids.
Sweet dreams.